First order of business, Abigail, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, we're live now. Senator Boner,
Excused.
Senator Driscoll,
Excused.
Senator French,
Present.
Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator Steinmetz, Representative Banks,
Here.
Representative Eklund,
Here.
Representative Larson,
Here.
Representative Nyman,
Here.
Representative Paxton,
Here.
Chairman Simpson,
Here.
Vice Chairman Hicks.
Here. We have a quorum and we are convened. I would ask any members if they have any opening statements or anything that they would wish to add to the agenda at this point in time. Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, Senator.
just if you could, make sure you use your mics when you're speaking, because we for sure can't hear you when you don't. So not you, we're hearing you just fine, but some of your fellow members, when we were doing roll call, we couldn't hear. So I just want to make sure, because we want to pick it all up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. So we're going to dive into the agenda. Director, any comments today, and any staff that you'd like to acknowledge while we're here, an introduction of yourself and your staff?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brandon Gephardt, the interim state engineer and one acting for the day director of water development.
Can you guys online hear the director? Yes, we got a yes and no mix. So
No.
okay.
So is that better, Representative Larson? Okay. With me, I've got Barry Lawrence, Bill Brewer, Chase DeValley, and George Mosier. And also is Greg Kerr from the UW Water Research Program and Jody Pring from UW Water Research Program. And then commission members, Mr. Bill Yankee and Mr. Mark Cott.
Thank you. Appreciate having some of the commissioners here. It's always nice that you come and keep track of see how bad we don't screw up all the good work you guys have done through the summer. So anyway, with that, I want to go ahead and jump into the agenda. First item on the agenda is legislative updates, Joint Appropriations Committee. I think I'll turn that over to Senator Steinmetz if she would like to give us just a little update on some of the actions of the Joint Appropriations Committee. And also, I would like to call on our other colleague that's on the Joint Appropriations Committee, Senator Guru and Chairman Simpson, if you have anything that you would like to provide as an update to associated. So you have 4 members on select water that are on Joint Appropriations, but I would start with an update from Senator Steinmetz and then Senator Guru, and then Evan, if you want to back clean up on this. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, we've finished up our budget work last Friday. We've tried to keep our budget bill fairly clean from ARPA, yet some of the conserved ARPA funds have made it into the budget. And then we'll have a direct ARPA bill. Our local governments will be added to the general fund in their own bill, and our CapCon bill will be separate. So we'll be working the budget that way this year. We were able to add $50 million in water projects to one of the ARPA bills. And so we're working that way as well as with the other bills we see before us today. We may have some amendments to that to see if we can do a little better than that. But at this time, that's kind of where we stand. I wasn't really prepared to say a lot about the budget. So thank you, Senator Hicks, for putting me on the spot. And I'll let my other colleagues also weigh in. And if there's something I think of while they're speaking, I'll jump back in. But I'll pass the ball to you, Senator Guru.
Well, thank you, Senator. I think you covered it pretty well. You know, the governor gave us a fairly flat budget as far as expenditures from last year. And we did then there was, you know, these ARPA funds and we talked about this and in addition to the goal of having a budget on your desk when you arrive, which we will be sticking with as our new custom. We're also going to try to get a little, we don't call them cheat sheets anymore, but a summary sheet about how these dollars work and, you know, the difference between general fund dollars, conserved general fund dollars, and ARPA direct dollars and what they can be used for, which will be very helpful because you'll hear us a lot talk about those terms and we'll interchange them. And so that's another goal that we're shooting for, is to help the body, you know, get up to speed on those terms as soon as they can. We'll work on the budget, I believe, and Senator Hicks is in leadership, so he knows more about this stuff than I do, but I think it's the second week, at least on the Senate side, that we're planning on working the budget. So I think, like I say, Senator Steinmetz covered the highlights. Water's a big part of that budget, and it was, once again, on the Senate, on your Senate side, it was a concerted effort to work on things, and it was for the whole group. I'm pointing out the Senate, but I just know what our goals were: to put money into savings, which we did, not as much as we wanted, but we did, and to stick with things that we thought would really help the economy. And I think water really was at the top of that list. There's a number of energy projects and other things that the governor talked about that we embraced. Some we did, some we didn't. But you know, I think those are kind of the highlights. The only other thing I'd mention is on the health department side, we you know, the governor worked on restoring some of the cuts that were made last year. We kind of went ahead with that. We were concerned all the way through with some of the rules that come with ARPA dollars. Increasing budgets, especially in the Department of Health and others, would require us then to keep matching those dollars beyond the years with those things. And so we tried to be very careful and judicious in our use of those. And so as not to tie future legislators' hands, but also to get people the help that they needed. So it was kind of a delicate balance. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say we left a significant amount of money for the floors, for both floors, to let the members bring ideas of their own. I know there's a lot of ideas percolating out there about what to do with that money. And so there's a fairly large pot of money for use on the floors, or put more money towards savings. So that's what I got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Simpson, a few words from the Appropriations Committee from your perspective.
Thank you. Going forward, folks, as your chairman, our $95 million bill is going to be my focus, our emphasis. We want to I'm going to need all of your help putting forth that in the best light and seeing if we can maximize that. If you recall, that's for wastewater projects and water projects, 95 million set aside with a cap of 7.5 million per project. And our three agencies that we selected are going to be the ones that put that together and put that project out for proposals to receive projects. So that's going to be our first and foremost emphasis. The bill we're going to address later today, remember, that is going to come out of general funds. And it was interesting for those of us that went into it. We had this ARPA pot of money, and then we had this general fund excess money. And as we worked through all the requests, both of them were gobbled up fairly substantially. And so my House Appropriations Committee did not look favorably on our $182 million bill that we're going to put together. Of course, they hadn't seen the details. I was just describing it to them and encouraging them to set aside money for a rainy day for these dams and reservoirs potential failures. But we need to fine tune that bill and get it the best shape we can and bring it forward. But I'm worried that the House Appropriations is going to really trim that back, and primarily because we simply spent most of the excess general funds. And so there isn't a lot of fluff left over there to be setting it aside in a savings account. So we'll see what happens, but we'll certainly pitch it. I think we should pass it and make it the best bill we can and deal with it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions for any of the members of the committee on updates from the appropriations? I don't see any questions online. So with that, next item on there is Joint Revenue Interim Committee. Director, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason we brought this up is this was one that we found just by looking. We weren't asked to testify to this, but what this bill does is uses, so our funding, if you remember, is out of mineral severance tax with that $155 million cap. This bill is trying to include funding for, I believe, the school foundation fund. And so they are adjusting the cap. And this was out of joint revenue. So they're adjusting the cap. They're moving the cap up to fund the school foundation. And as they did that, they went back and changed all of the percentages for all of the other funding out of that earmark, those are earmarked funds. And so right now, we still get the same amount of money, although it's a different percentage than we had before because of the adjustment of the cap. So we just watch that just because it's out there and it's open. We don't want the potential for them to change some of those earmarked funds, including our funds. So we're just kind of watching, monitoring that. Just wanted to bring that to, we mentioned that to the commission yesterday, and that was a carryover to just inform this body as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's certainly something that I'll understand the complexities and maybe what we need to do is prior to the session is take that bill up, select water committee. I think it's going to be vitally important that you understand what it does when we talk about what get funds over and under the cap and the percentage breakout. It is particularly disconcerting to me to see that now we're doing this through the under the cap revenue distribution adjustments and stuff. So I'll work with the Chairman Simpson, but I think maybe prior to the session, we get in there. What I'd like to do, maybe just have an informal working group with the select water committee and walk through that particular bill because it does have significant implications, not just the water. It's your county roads and a number of other areas too that are involved with those distributions, that 150 million under the cap, because it is fairly complex. I think we need everybody on the select water committee to understand what that bill will do and the ramifications of the bill, because it could potentially reduce the amount of money by adjusting those percentages that come into the water development account and divert those into the school account. So anyway, we'll take a look at that. I'll work with the Chairman Simpson and see if we can't get a time, once before we get really buried into the session, to pull the select water committee together and just walk through that bill so everybody understands the implications of it. So with that, next item on the agenda is the bipartisan infrastructure plan. This is the federal program. So, Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And really what's going on with that is, if you remember, we mentioned that we repurposed one of our positions, and part of the role of this repurposed position, and it's Chase DeVelli, who's here with us, is to help track federal funding. And part of what he's been doing is monitoring the funding that was put forth in the bipartisan infrastructure law and seeing how we can use that for our water projects. And things are starting to become clear. They have to make each of the different divisions within the bill. They have to make rules and criteria and figure out how they're going to disperse that money. So we're watching that, and things are becoming more and more clear every day. So we're continuing to use that and be able to leverage as much of that as we can for our state projects. One thing I will note within that bill, there was a portion of the bill that we felt could be used to help fund LaPrel. And so we worked with the governor's office, and the governor actually wrote a letter, I believe it was last month, to the Secretary of the Interior, and made the request to potentially use that money for LaPrel. So we're waiting to hear what the results of that will be, but that request has been made.
So do we know when that we're going to have the draft or the final rules out? Is there any projected time frame for that? In my recollection, and Director, if you need to phone a friend with Chase, seems how he's supposed to be the guy, that's fine. But the original version of that, I think it was like $800 million for Western water projects, and that did include storage in at least one of the drafts that I saw. So is that still in there? So that's two questions. Is there a storage component in there, and when do you think that we might see the final rules on this stuff?
Is this working?
Mr. Chair, there is a significant amount of money in there. There's a lot of it is for Bureau of Rec type projects, Water Smart, and money that's for specific projects. I don't know when the final rules are going to come out for that.
So, Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm asking that is we've done this with some of the budgetary items. So what we'll do is in the budget, we'll say these funds for this project or this agency for this program, ARPA dollars, unless it's determined that ARPA dollars are not eligible. Then it goes back on the general fund or special revenue. So just thinking if there's some of this stuff that we think might be eligible under the infrastructure bill, because of the nature of the time frame that we deal with. I mean, we won't be back here for another year. Let's assume something became eligible here 60 days from now. We could apply for them rather than use account 1 or account 2 to fund these. If we could go after those federal dollars and conserve those account 1 and account 2 dollars. So we may want to take a look at that, Abigail, and maybe, circle around with water development and our budget fiscal people and see what they think. But we may want to, at this point in time, it would have to come as an amendment to one of the committees as it works through the process. But look at that and actually say, these would be the federal infrastructure bill. If they're available, if they're not available, it just stays on our budget. And so maybe if we could do a little work between now and the next 2 or 3 weeks and look at that, and we can have our budget fiscal people look at that transportation, because they're watching it too. See, but I'm just thinking what I'd hate to do is have rules come out and funds available, and we don't have the mechanism to be able to apply to them because we don't have projects ready until the next omnibus water bill a year from now. So it's something that I think we probably ought to look at. Your thoughts on that, Chairman Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We definitely want to monitor it. We want to make sure, and it interacts with our ARPA bill too. We want to make sure that we're utilizing the right funds in the right places. I was surprised in Appropriations Committee when the State Revolving Loan Fund people reported to us. They asked for double the appropriation because they anticipated their numbers from the federal government would be doubled this year outside of the infrastructure bill. So we're going to have plenty of money in the State Revolving Loan Fund for loans. And so, yeah, we're going to monitor this. Appreciate Chase's keeping us abreast of the latest information.
Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add to that, one of the things that we're kind of focusing on is a lot of the money seems to be going to existing programs. Chase mentioned Water Smart and SRF as the vehicle to get these funds out. So we are looking at what the state can apply for via water development, as well as working with our sponsors to help them. If they have a project with us, we're encouraging them to go out and find that funding as well. So it's a multi-pronged approach to access this funding, but we are working on that.
And I'm just throwing something out here as working in this area and stuff. I know that we're in the process of looking at a small water smart grant over there. I wonder if there's some opportunity because those funds are available for, they're tiered. You either got a small project, large project and stuff. If we couldn't bundle some of these small projects around the state up and have the water development office pretty much similar to what I would say we do with the small water program. So we would bundle those for one large water smart project and then partition those out amongst the participating entities with maybe a group of irrigation districts, or a group of conservation districts, instead of, chasing 75,000, with these local entity levels. Maybe we need to go after a $3 or $4, $5, $10 million water smart. It has a component, it may be pavilion irrigation with Goshen irrigation with Big Sandy, and look at just something to think, because they are going to put a lot of money in the program. It's a way that we can potentially tap into it. Just a thought. So, if you kind of run that around through the staff and maybe get some ideas, if that's something we can do along those lines, let's chase those federal infrastructure dollars through a large water smart grant. Anyway, any more discussion on the bipartisan infrastructure bill? Director Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question on the city revolving fund. We know that there's a component of loan forgiveness there. When that funding level goes up, does the loan forgiveness level go up with it, commensurate, or how does that work? Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, I'm not real sure what the grant or principal forgiveness does. I'm not real attuned to that. But it's my assumption that yes, I think some of those principal forgiveness monies go up as well as some set asides. I will mention that we worked with Office of State Lands and DEQ, and they're trying to make some modifications to statute to allow a little more flexibility. And I think right now what they're looking at is those states matching portion of that. We have to match 20%. So even though they're giving us an influx of money, we still have to match that. And 10% of that right now comes out of water development, 10% out of state lands. So they are working on some legislative suggestions for changes and trying to figure out how to get that through our legislature to make those changes. So state lands has been working on that. They may be contacting some of this body to see if they would entertain maybe looking at that.
Any other questions on bipartisan infrastructure? See any more questions? Abigail, next thing on the agenda is groundwater exploration grant. Director, is this a acting director meet? Are you going to cover this portion, or are you going to? Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I say I'll handle it, but I'm actually going to phone a friend on this. George Mosier, who manages our groundwater grant program.
We're a pretty friendly committee. You can phone a friend around here anytime you want to.
I appreciate it because I'm going to be doing it a lot today. But Mr. Chairman, this is through our groundwater grant program, 2 projects that George will describe. And it's my understanding that the committee, and I may have to phone a friend, for Abby as well, but it's my understanding that the committee reviews and recommends these
Mr. Chairman, I looked at this and I also phoned my friend Josh Anderson to see what his thoughts are as well, since he's worked with this before I can. The statute says submitted to the committee 30 days for review and recommendation. I think it's the committee's prerogative if you want the full 30 days to look at these, or if you want to go ahead and make a recommendation today.
Mr. Chairman, what my preference would be is just explain what we're doing here and then go ahead and unless there's an objection from the committee, as to, you could just walk us through what the request is and then act on it today. Any objections to that, committee? All right, let's proceed. Go ahead, Mr. Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, the Water Development Commission considered 2 contracts for groundwater exploration grant program dollars. The dollars that are set aside in the groundwater exploration grant contract account are something that are set aside as part of legislation that secures those dollars. So the groundwater grant program doesn't require project-specific legislation for each individual project. The current balance in that account prior to these 2 projects in front of you today is approximately $1.5 million. Excuse me. The first project is for Happy Valley. They are an improvement in service district located just south of Afton. They're a couple miles south of Afton. They currently rely on 2 springs that are located east of them. The springs are between 1/2 mile and 3/4 mile up a canyon, and they are dealing with some aging infrastructure problems related to the transmission pipeline. They are also looking at, and as part of a recommendation from a level 2 study that was recently completed, they are evaluating the options of combining with a neighboring district. Happy Valley itself has about 33 taps within their district. The adjacent subdivision has upwards of 70, and both of these entities are dealing with similar issues. They both have springs that are located off to the east of them and transmission line aging problems. So they are evaluating some ideas for combining together. As part of that, Happy Valley has brought forth a groundwater exploration grant program project to drill and look for a source of water really close to the subdivision. They're looking at an alluvial well that would be approximately 400 feet deep, and they're trying to site that well close to their existing transmission line and hopefully minimize the dollars that would be associated with future tie-ins and things like that. They are targeting a total project cost of $398,000. The groundwater exploration grant program allows a 75% match, and the match amount would be $298,500. Before I move on to Cokeville, Mr. Chair, I would ask if there are any questions about Happy Valley.
So real quick, George, members of the committee. So we're looking at a total, if they combine the districts to utilize these groundwater wells, is 103 taps, correct?
Yes, sir. I think that Happy Valley recognizes that the Osmond system, which is their neighbors, Osmond system has a little bit higher flow from their spring. And so Happy Valley thinks that drilling an alluvial well and having an alternate source of supply puts them in a good spot to be, negotiating partners in this arrangement for the future.
Committee, any questions? Chairman Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Folks, the results of the study is that we needed a regional system here, and we've encouraged that as we've been working with these 2 entities. It was obvious that Osmond, whose springs are further up the canyon and have had great test results, have the strongest source. And as we're negotiating back and forth to try to get these 2 systems to merge into a regional system, it became apparent that the Osmond folks wanted the Happy Valley folks to bring a water source. And so Happy Valley's going to drill this well, bring a source to the table. And upon doing that, they've agreed verbally to merge and to do one pipeline and one system. So we're really quite excited about this. We're happy that Happy Valley is making this decision to pay for this well all by themselves so that it's a fair negotiation between the two parties. So I encourage you to support this groundwater exploration grant.
So, Mr. Chairman and George, I'd ask either one of you, is there the potential for an expansion on this? So if we go through this and the districts combine, or is this pretty much built out to the point that we wouldn't expect to see new users come onto the system?
Mr. Chairman, I believe I can address that. The greater Osmond area has a lot of open space. There isn't a lot of 40-acre parcels left, but there's a lot of 10-acre parcels, so they can expand geographically. They have the Fairview district on one side, Smoot on the other side, and Afton on the one side, and so their boundaries are going to be fairly restricted. But we're drilling the well as anticipation of bringing all the sources together, which will allow for growth.
Thank you. That's the big thing that I wanted to make sure that the capacity that we're looking at now service future capacity, and that we're not back here doing another groundwater exploration ramp for another 20 or 30 taps 5 years from now, as this area is experiencing rapid growth. So that has been part of the analysis, as I understand it. Is that correct, Chairman Simpson?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. George, anything you want to add to that?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just for the committee's knowledge, that it is a priority and a preference for the Water Development Office to regionalize these water systems. So this does fall in line with what we try to do.
All right, thank you. Members of the committee, George, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, but I would stand for other questions if there are any.
All right, committee, any questions? All right, I would, at this time, do we need to entertain a motion on approval of this groundwater exploration grant for the Happy Valley Water Improvement District?
So moved.
Moved, is there a second? Do we need to do a roll call vote on this, Abby, or just a voice vote?
Mr. Chairman, no, and if you're okay, it's a recommendation.
So, at this point in time, all those in favor of the recommendation, raise your hand. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Approve your recommendation. We recommend that you guys move forward. All right, next item on the agenda is the Town of Cokeville Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I'll turn it over to George, but, and I failed to do this previously, but for those following along with the e-notebook, we're on PDF page 3 or tab 3C and 3D for this item, just to help guide you.
Thank you for that, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second groundwater grant program contract that was considered by the commission yesterday is for the town of Cokeville. The town of Cokeville has a somewhat similar situation in that they have sources that are located east of town. In this case, 3 to 4 miles east of town, they have 2 wells. The results of some EPA sampling indicated that there were some concerns over potential groundwater and surface water connectivity issues. The commission has previously approved a groundwater grant application for Cokeville to try to remedy that situation. However, in the interim, Cokeville and their consultant stepped back to evaluate their options. The existing groundwater grant that was in place was purely going to replace one of those wells. So drill a well in kind of the same location, use existing transmission infrastructure to pipe that water to their storage tanks. When they stepped back, it became apparent that perhaps a better solution would be to relocate the project and drill yet another alluvial well, a well in town, to get away from their long transmission line problems. Something that they are experiencing is ongoing leaks and aging infrastructure problem associated with this long transmission line. And a solution of an alluvial well would provide them not only ample supply of water, but get away from the transmission line problems. They are looking at a well that would be approximately 350 feet deep. Groundwater in the area is relatively shallow, between 20 and 30 feet below ground surface. They've also done some preliminary evaluation by sampling a nearby well to try to determine if they had any kind of shallow groundwater constituent problems, mainly nitrates, and that looks favorable. Their plan at this point is to drill and case a significant distance into the target aquifer and seal off any shallow zones that might potentially lead to concerns in the future. The total project cost associated with this groundwater grant is $368,690. At a 75% grant package, that is $276,525. The difference in funding associated with that is that the previous groundwater grant was for $209,000. They have not spent any money out of that and are committed to vacating that project upon beginning this new one. The difference in contract price between those two is $67,525. So there is a little bit of an increase in cost associated with moving this well closer into town. The increase in cost is predominantly due to increased depth in drilling. We've of course seen some construction costs increase here in the past year or two, and they believe that eliminating some of the concerns over aging pipeline infrastructure makes that offset worthwhile to them.
So committee, any questions for George? George, I'm probably remiss, but would you just walk through for the committee how the groundwater exploration grant program works? Because it's a little bit different animal within water development than what we consider the traditional program from the standpoint. The state does all this, and then if it actually turns out to be a well, then we do the grant notes, correct?
Mr. Chair, the uniqueness here is that the dollars for groundwater grant program are set aside and live in a pool of money that the project applicants can come forward with pretty much at any time. They don't follow a traditional project timing where we would consider things that are at our normal dates and then build those into legislative funding. So these particular applications can come in the door at any point in time. When we fund these, the 75% grant package essentially creates a well and a product that the sponsor owns, as opposed to you might be thinking about a level 2 project where then the state of Wyoming would own that well and they would need to carry it forward to level 3 funding or something of that nature. So these can occur at about any time, which makes them relatively advantageous for Cokeville, for instance. Cokeville is under some advisories from EPA to remedy a situation that they see as problematic, and they would like to get going with this as soon as possible. So freeing up groundwater grant monies for their use is really good from a project timing perspective. My understanding is that they would like to drill a well early this summer and be able to get going with tying that in.
So George, what happens on the groundwater exploration grant program if we drill an exploration well and we don't get water?
The sponsor's taking somewhat of a risk themselves. They are still on the hook for paying at least the 25% of their project funding. So by building in some flexibility on timing, they do take a little bit of the risk themselves.
So committee, any questions on this specific project? The one I have, George, is I understand moving the well closer to town. There's also some associated risks. Back to the reason that the EPA was concerned with the risk of the other one, is the E. coli component. So is there a source water protection plan that's kind of going to go hand in hand with these new wells? My biggest concern is once we drill a new well, obviously it has a higher potential, given the closer you get to proximity of a lot of, particularly if there's subdivisions around that have septic systems, it's potential shallow groundwater contamination. We're back into the E. coli component of significant treatment. So when we do these type of things, is there a source water protection type program that goes with these municipal or improvement district wells?
Mr. Chair, not necessarily as part of the groundwater grant program. That's a similar thing in that groundwater grant doesn't fund tie-in, doesn't fund permanent production pumping equipment associated with the wells. So that burden would fall to the project sponsor.
Just the thought that, it's something that we should recommend as we move forward, particularly with water improvement districts, municipal wells. What I hate to do is lead them down the track and we drill another well in 5 years without an E. coli project. And so I think, we should direct them to EPA or not DEQ and say as part of our program, you need to also consider developing source water protection around this. I think it's just a good educational opportunity, in particular for these small water improvement districts that we can help them help themselves. So.
Thank you, Chair, for that comment. I might say also that after the presentation yesterday in front of the Water Development Commission, I met with the geologist on the project, Ben Jordan, and we were talking about ways to coordinate on submitting plans for this construction project to DEQ and working through approval on that. So I think the sponsor and their consultants are tracking with those sorts of concerns.
No, I think we're tracking with the consultant. So those discussions are good. That's good, George. So, committee, any other questions on this? Chairman Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, I think I can add some light here. The location that the Cokeville is planning to install this well is west of the railroad tracks, which is in a residential community. And of course, DEQ has rules on how close they can have septic tanks from wells when you're siting those. So that will be monitored. But in this application, the town of Cokeville is fully sewered. They have a mechanical treatment plant. And so all their wastewater is being collected in the municipality. So there would be very, very little potential for fecal coliform from residences that would impact as well.
So the Chairman Simpson, do you know, I'm assuming, and I'm just assuming that it's like a lot of areas, that they may be on a municipal water project, but they still have their own private wells within the area. At least most of the areas I'm not.
There may be, Mr. Chairman, there may be some individual wells scattered out there, but this municipality has had a community water system for decades and decades. So I doubt that there is any other than just a couple miscellaneous ones.
All right. Well, thank you, committee. Can I get a motion to recommend? So moved. Can I get a second?
Mr. Chairman, Senator
Yes.
Guru has his hand up.
Yep. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll second, but for purposes of discussion, I just have one question. It's a new guy question. Don't smirk, but you can school me, Mr. Chairman, and as you do so often. I'm looking at the application and I see the financial statement. It says annual revenues, total annual revenues from sales and other sources, 127,000, and the expenditures at 141. As an old town councilman, I remember these enterprise funds have to kind of pay for themselves. Are we starting? I mean, I know it's only a little bit, but seem to be starting behind the 8 ball. Is that because of the large balance, a couple lines down in their fund? Is that what makes that work, or is there something I'm missing? And no, that's probably true. If anyone can answer that for me.
I think George is on the hot seat on this one as the project manager. George, would you go ahead and answer the senator's question if you can?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had some discussion about that in our office, and all we could really decide was that in fact, they had made a clerical error on their application because those two numbers were reversed on the previous groundwater grant application.
Okay. Well, all right, that helps me out. That's, I just wanted to make sure that's where they're, as long as they're heading in the general direction, I'm definitely in favor of it. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Nothing gets by your critical eye. We appreciate you looking at that. So we've got a motion and a second. So Abby, what is the motion? We're not approving it.
Mr. Chairman, it's recommendations.
So we're approving the recommendation or,
You're recommending the project.
okay. Motion is we recommend the proposed budget of 276,525 Cokeville number 4 well. All those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Back to the agenda on item number 4, construction project contract amendments. Mr. or Director Gephardt, can you direct us to where that is in the tab for those folks that are online?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, it is under tab 4A and 4B, which starts on page 75. We'll have a memo on page 75 and then the actual amendment agreement on page 76. Mr. Chairman, if I may phone a friend again, Jason Mead is going to present this amendment.
Acting Director Mead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment to the Stantec contract for the Middle Piney Reservoir project was considered by the commission yesterday. Stantec is the design engineer and construction management engineer for this project. And this recommendation really stems from the conversations we had back at the August meeting when we were all in Douglas for the tour. And at that time, we talked about a list of potential change orders and project amendments that were anticipated as NW Construction finished up the completion of the project. And since that time, the seepage control system improvements and site evaluation, this stemmed around the additional dewatering efforts that we had been seeing from the contractor and the concern that the seepage collection and drainage system weren't going to be adequately sized for the future management of the reservoir and the dam. And since that time, they've been, I guess, Stantec has gone through that engineering evaluation, put together the additional designs for several hundred feet of that drain pipeline and gravel and sand filters. Worked with the Forest Service, and those have been installed by the contractor now. So this amendment simply basically includes that additional effort and the cost for that effort into their contract so we can compensate them. And that's in the amount of $25,000. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions? Jason, do you anticipate that with this current recommendation that this will address all of the seepage issues and groundwater on this project? Or are we potentially anticipating that there's still other issues that might arise on as far as trying to manage the seepage through the dam or around the abutments?
Mr. Chairman, I feel like this is really meant to handle the regional groundwater effect that we've been seeing from downstream. It's coming off that right abutment landslide. And I believe that the design engineers feel that this is going to adequately handle that so that system's not overwhelmed and can safely pass that regional groundwater away from the toe of the dam. The additional, I guess, water that we see coming underneath the dam, we will still be looking at that. And that's part of this monitorings and a number of I guess instruments were installed this last fall as they were bringing the dam up, the embankment up, and those will be monitored this spring as spring runoffs come and fill up the reservoir a little bit, and we'll see what the seepage looks like in and around, or I should say under and around the foundation. And then that will tell us where the final grouting work needs to be done. So that final grouting work, which if you recall, when we were talking about the contingency funds in the first place, The original request, full request, was thought to be somewhere around 2.75 or 2.725 million. And you guys approved, I think, 925,000 and waiting on that. The majority of that was going to be this final grouting work. And we thought it would be best to hold off until we saw what that analysis of those monitoring instrumentation and all that this spring looked like, so we could have a better handle on that. So that the short answer after that long explanation is we're getting close, and this spring we'll have a better feel for what that final grouting effort is going to look like.
Oh, and Jason, just a real quick question. I'm assuming there's already tow drains in place below the dam, and this grouting effort is more as a to try to cut that water off from moving through the dam. But is there already tow drains in the original design in place below the dam? Or if not, if we looked at that as an alternative already to address this, or is it sounds like grouting is the preferred engineering remedy for any additional groundwater.
Mr. Chairman, there are blanket drains, which are essentially tow drains and chimney drains that have been designed, and then also, as we just mentioned, upgraded as part of the dam embankment. And the grouting is more of the foundation material that we're concentrating on.
All right, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Okay. So what's the motion here, Abigail? What do we need to do with this? Approve the contract amendment?
Mr. Chairman, it would be the same to review or recommend that a commission enter into the contract.
All right. I would move that with the recommendation of the commission. I get a second? Second. All those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Director, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda is a contingency fund request. We recently had a bid for the Bighorn Regional Transmission 2020 project, and we are talking on tab 5 of the e-notebook on page 103. And I will bring Bill Brewer up to describe what we're asking for.
Chairman. In the fall of 2021, we had 2 projects come in that we're looking at. At the 90% design, the engineer's estimates were appearing to be over the current appropriation. And we advised them that as they move towards final design and bidding, that they would align those bid dates around future commission meetings, select water meetings, so that if we needed sponsors contingency funds, we could look at those. Both of those sponsors took our advice and set their bid dates both for January 11th. There was no particular reason for that date, but they both chose that same date. So the first one I'm going to discuss is the Bighorn Regional Joint Powers Board project. This is already a regional water system, which we support, and they're looking at bringing in the community of Burlington, town of Burlington, into their system. And the project is 14.7 miles of pipeline, pump stations, and other equipment to connect the town of Burlington into this regional system. 7 bids were received for the project. The engineer's estimate was right in the lower group of 3 of those 7. So it appears we had a reasonable engineer's estimate, and we have responsive bids for the project. For the amount of the current low bid, lowest responsive and responsible bid, and including an additional 5% contingency in case we have any change orders or anything that comes along, they were looking at a couple million in additional funds. They're looking at the majority of that money to come from rural development and have asked the commission to supply $750,000 of additional funds to move this project forward and award the contract. The commission yesterday approved moving forward with completing an amendment for this project, which is in works at this time. Some were advising. Select board of that decision.
Committee, any questions on Bighorn Regional Transmission?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
If it's okay, I'd just like to explain to the body what the contingency fund was set up for. It is for a couple of purposes, and this is one of them. The contingency fund is set up in each of our accounts, and it's for multiple purposes. One purpose is when we get a bid, those bids will have a contractual binding date. Typically, it's 30 days. So by having this contingency account, if a bid comes in high, but we feel it's still a good bid, then the commission can use this contingency account to add some money in to fund the project. And that saves us from having to cancel a bid, go through a legislative process, get the money, and then rebid it. It's also used for during construction when unforeseen items come up that exceed the budget. It's an avenue to continue with the project and minimize the risk of delay claims and additional cost to a project. So that's the reason behind these contingency funds. So what we're asking for is in line with the intent of those funds.
Director Gebhardt, when I'm looking through here, it goes through construction. Engineers opinion of construction costs. And when I look at the original budget on the project, budget is 6.5. So maybe I'm missing something here, just trying to flip through here. The engineer's opinion, and this opinion may have been after the original grant assumption.
The engineer's opinion of probable cost completed there was completed in October 2021. And the original appropriation also included a significant amount of investments that we needed to obtain for this 14.7 mile pipeline. So of that 6.5, a portion of that has already been spent on engineering fees, pre-bid or pre-construction costs.
Okay. Committee, any questions? All right, I'd entertain a motion that, we got a question. Is this Senator Drew?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. I'm sorry I wasn't able to tune in yesterday. I was in another committee meeting, but if someone could just, the commission recommended approval, and I'm ready to make that motion myself, but I just wanted to hear, did they have any discussion about this? Were there any problems that they saw, or was this fairly standard? What was the tenor of that discussion, or was there any? If anybody could help me.
I do not recall any opposition to this program project.
Okay.
I would add, Mr. Chairman, that right now is a very tough bidding climate. There's a lot of things going on with labor, materials, oil, gas prices. This is not surprising in the bidding climate that we're seeing. Because of the bids that we received, we do think that what the bids we received are the value of the project. So that's why we're ready.
Okay.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
We do have two commissioners here. Senator Drew, would either one of you like to weigh in on Senator Drew's questions, whether there was any discussion amongst the commission or he had any concerns? So the answer, Senator Drew, to your question from the commissioners they concurred with the discussions that the director of the project manager, Bill, had basically indicated. So with that committee, do I have a recommendation?
So moved to recommend approval.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, if I
University
may,
of Wyoming Water Research Programs.
well, if I may, Bill can provide an update on another bid that we received. He mentioned the Levitt Reservoir bid. We just want to provide an update on that, and then it'll play into some of the discussion we're having on contingency account funds later on.
Okay, go ahead, Bill.
And as I discussed earlier, we had anticipated 2 projects to bid at this point. For the Levitt project, we also received the bid on January 11th. And previously, we were anticipating increased costs as we saw materials costs, fuel, et cetera, have been increasing. And we had anticipated bids to come in potentially 8 to 10 million over our current available funding. However, just kind of step back a step. We had 9 firms that were pre-qualified for this project and showed pretty good interest in moving forward and bidding this project. However, prior to bidding, we had 4 firms announce that they were not going to bid. And in the end, we only received 1 bid for the project. So contacting the other 4 firms, they had stated things such as bonding issues, too many other commitments, and some other reasons why they did not bid. The 1 bid we did receive was for 70.3 million. We went into this project with approximately 41 million available, and we're anticipating, as I said, maybe 8 to 10 million over that budget. So at this point in time, we're not coming forward looking for contingency funds, and we are working with the sole bidder to determine if there's any areas we can trim this budget. There's portions of the project that could change to make the project fully functional, but not necessarily have the full expense and some other things. So this is mainly just to give you update on that bid, and that the bid was significantly over, and that we're currently working with the contractor and the engineer to see if there's anywhere we can bring this cost down. We are not, at this point, we have not determined whether we will be able to negotiate this price down to something reasonable, or if we will need to.
Committee, any questions for Bill on that? I've got a question on that. So specifically in an arrangement like this, you have a project sponsor. You have the Water Development Office, and you run into a situation like this. We're the banker, but they're the actual sponsor of the project. Who does the negotiations and negotiate prices? This is not uncommon within this industry. We've dealt with this at the local level on numerous issues that, for whatever reason, a situation where we have a budget, we get a bid, one bidder, or even 2 bidders. And if you take the low bid, you're still 10 or 20% over what the budget price is. So we typically, in the capacity that I work on, do the negotiations. On a scenario like this, we have a sponsor and a banker, which is the Water Development Office. Who does those negotiations?
And to be clear, the sponsor and the engineer are working on the negotiations. We are giving them advice as we move through this.
On a project of this magnitude, I know it's a tough climate out there. Another question I had, is this an in-state or an out-of-state contract?
This is an out-of-state contract.
I don't know how many, this was pre-qualified selection. I don't remember how many in-state types of projects, we need a lot of out-of-state interest. Fewer in-state.
Do you know we had 2 interested in pre-qualified in-state contractors?
We got their eye on construction. That's a compounding problem. You know, we have these dollars coming. Do these. So the next logical question is what happens if we don't negotiate? There's several alternatives, but I'd like to get your guys' as a purview as to where the office may. There is a range of alternatives, and maybe Director Bill, one of you guys would want to explain to the committee what those range of alternatives would be in a situation where it's not able to reduce these costs.
I know some of the things that have been being discussed at the moment and were discussed previous to the bid was whether or not we break the project up into smaller portions and hopefully get some more local contractors to look at the work. There's issues with trying to break the project up because the materials, the earth materials were going to be borrowed on site. But if you have one borrow pit producing materials for multiple portions of the work, there's the potential to have clashes between contractors. So originally we looked at breaking it up. It was decided that it was probably going to go smoother to not break it up. However, that may come back on the table.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also add some of the other alternatives that we throw around typically are, can we phase the project? When we talk about a project like this, phasing a project is risky as well because all of those components are needed to make the whole project function. You don't get one of the phases completed, then you don't have a complete project. That's another option. Another option is to wait and rebid it. The unknown is unknown, but we've been through these cycles before where material costs are very high and volatile. They do eventually stabilize, but there's a lot of unknowns, and Senator Hicks alluded to the fact that there's a lot of money coming out. It's going to put a stress on labor force, ability to get projects completed, as well as the materials across the country. So that's another consideration too when we think about rebidding.
All right, committee, any additional questions here? Have a motion. We don't need a motion. This is just an update. So,
Just an update, Mr. Chairman.
so stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. Ongoing evolution. So where are we at now on the agenda? It's University of Wyoming research.
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman.
Before we get too far into our agenda, it might be well advised to ask for any public input on anything we've discussed so far today.
All right. Do we have anybody online? Public? Anybody in the audience like to testify on any of the topics we've covered so far today? Who's that character in the back there that's hiding behind you, Bill? All right, no public comment. Next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is the UW Water Research Program. And Greg Kerr, from the Water Research Program, is here. He'll make a presentation. But what you have in front of you, and we're a little late on getting some of this information
Mr.
out.
Director, the tab, I believe, is tab E. For those online.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
This was one of the documents you were handed out individually this morning. And for the online members, I sent all the day of materials in an email that they should be able to find in
Okay,
their
so
inbox.
you should have an email from Abigail. Yeah. And then working on off the tab. As far as the projects, it's tab B, right? That's what I have. Well, members that have the books available to you here.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, that's the meeting notebook from the commission meeting. So yes, that is the same document.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we've got it. Everybody's got it. Does everybody have that online? All right. Go ahead, Greg.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just explain the process that we go through to get to this point. So the commission and select water reviewed proposals previously in the year, one of the other meetings. They approve those proposals and then they go out and they solicit them. So that process Greg can describe, but I will mention that after that, then the rankings are presented to the commission. The commission approves or recommends what should be included in the Omnibus Bill. And that recommendation comes to this body. And this body has an option to recommend ultimately will what go into the Omnibus Planning Bill. And so Greg, do you want to explain a little bit about the process of how we develop the ultimate or recommendation list?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Greg Kerr, Director of the Office of Water Programs at the University of Wyoming. During our process, we originally start, and I'll try to make this brief, but soliciting issues for water resources in the state of Wyoming occurs early on in the year. And we solicit those from various state agencies, from various individuals and different government entities to come up with a list of issues and topics that the state needs help with that can be presented to the University of Wyoming so that we can take advantage of faculty members at the University of Wyoming to do research and train individual students in water resources so that they may hopefully continue on in a field of water that ends up staying in the state of Wyoming. So those topics are generated early on. An RFP is developed that is approved by both the Water Development Commission and by you folks on the Select Water Committee. That RFP then is released to the University of Wyoming with the various water research topics. Proposals are then received around October. Those proposals then go through a review process, a peer review, reviews by an 8-member committee, advisory committee to the water research program. That committee does a thorough review, and we have a meeting that determines which projects they feel should move forward on a ranking list to the commission and to the Select Water. So what you have before you is a ranking list that was developed by a process of review and discussion of all projects by individuals with science backgrounds, agency individuals that work on a daily basis with some of the individual proposals. So that ranking, if that listing, that's page 1, last page, page 7 of your notebook, of the handout, sorry. That gives a ranking by the advisory committee of what proposals they felt were most important to present to you. The commission had discussions and selected or went along with the committee's ranking. First of all, with project D and B were approved yesterday, and then further discussion was done on Project E, as it is an important issue in the state of Wyoming, looking at evaluation of critical minerals, mainly lithium and rare earth elements in Wyoming, as well as the economic viability of mining. This particular project was listed last for various reasons. Not that the proposal was maybe a bad proposal, but maybe because the amount of money that was proposed and the efforts for various results, hopefully, that would come about from that, they didn't feel that the time element and dollars involved in that were adequate to do what was done, was already currently being done on a higher project at the University of Wyoming that is looking at basically the same type of issues. So the School of Energy Resources at the university has a $21.9 million project. Part of that project is looking at rare earth minerals, ways of looking at coal deposits and how we can extract rare earth elements from that and possibly lithium. So it was felt by the committee that that effort, which is a much larger effort for millions of dollars, kind of overrode the project that we have presented to the Water Research. That's why it was put last, not because the issue is not important, because it is. We had these discussions earlier last year with Senator Hicks about lithium in the state of Wyoming and what we could do. That's why we had that in the RFP. And that's where we ended up. So yesterday in committee discussions, then decided to add that back in. So the commission felt it was important enough to add all three of those projects. And that was done and voted on, and that's where we are today.
So, Mr. Chairman, I was able to attend most of the meeting. So the committee and verification, the director of the commission, the way I understood the recommendation was to send those three projects for consideration. The commission did not rank those as this is our first, this is our second. It's a recommendation. We then take those three projects up, consider those as part of the research. I don't think it was necessarily, there was no ranking involved. There was a follow-up discussion that we had. So Greg had provided some information to the commission. I don't know that I brought it down with me, but I had asked, what have we traditionally funded through the water research program? In the last 7 years, Greg provided some information. Greg, do you have that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do.
So it was my recollection that we've historically been funding somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 a year of the water research program. Yeah, I pulled those, and the range was like 243 to 397,000 is what we, within that range of what we funded in the last 3 years based on select water. If you add all three of these projects up, it comes up to roughly $507,000 if the select water committee was so inclined to fund all three of them, which is, it's 100,000 more than we have traditionally put into this water research program. So the way I understood the recommendation that came out of the commission is for us to consider those three, but because we can basically, we will authorize the expenditures through the budget on this, that it would be our consideration as to which of those projects get funded based on budgetary constraints. So does everybody understand where we're at right now? We've got three projects that have been recommended for our consideration by the commission with no ranking. Traditionally, we funded this program between $243,000 and $400,000 in the last 7 years. My recommendation to the committee is given the budgetary where we're at, that we would select 2 of these and fund them. I have my own predisposition as to what 2 should be funded, but rather than bias the committee is with it, I would like to get some discussion on those 3 projects. And if there's something somebody feels strongly about funding, let's have that discussion. So this time, committee, what I'd like to do is open it up to 3 projects that have been recommended to us are the economic impact, curtailment, demand management in the Wyoming-Colorado River Basin, high resolution UAV drone LiDAR and multispectral erosion monitoring to inform best management practices that seek to reduce sediment accumulation in the Wildwood Dam. That's $197,500. And then the last one, which is a select water committee, is evaluation of critical mineral deposits, mainly lithium and rare earth in Wyoming, as well as the economic viability of mining these resources. That's $170,000. If you funded all 3 of them, it'd be about $508,000. So any discussion, committee, on any 3 of those projects? You know, Mr. Chairman, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to ask that we take a 10-minute break and allow some of the members of the Select Water Committee to drill down on the, give them 10 minutes. We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll recess for 10 minutes and reconvene. You know, committee members, take a look at those. So if you have questions on those, we can come back. For right now, we will adjourn for 10 minutes and reconvene at 10:15. All right, I'm going to call this meeting back to order of the Select Water Committee. We're on tab item 5, University of Wyoming Water Research Programs. Committee, if you've had time to review the 3 projects that were recommended by the commission that Select Water consider for funding. Any discussion on any 3 of those projects, committee members? I don't see any hands. Do I have a motion from anybody? So Representative Nyman.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend or motion that we would take on or support item E, item D for support.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Does everybody online hear the motion? So the motion is to recommend funding Project D, which is the economic impact of curtailment and demand management in Wyoming and the Colorado River Basin. The amount requested for that would be $140,277. The other project was Project E, evaluation of critical mineral deposits, mainly lithium and rare earth elements in Wyoming, as well as economic viability of mining these resources. That was for $170,000. Total on that would be $310,277. That's the motion on the floor. We've got a second. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thanks,
Mr.
Greg.
Chairman, thank you.
Next item on the agenda. Just don't know. I keep looking up there and I don't know, say an acting director, acting.
Director's fine.
How about we just say jack of all trades? Director, jack of all trades. Next item is Omnibus Water Bill Planning. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the folks here, we handed out a spreadsheet, blue spreadsheet. It's called our blue sheet. And maybe we can ask to share or to present this on the screen for the folks at home. This spreadsheet, I'll describe it and how it ties to the bill. This is a really good summary of what's in the bill. And so if it's okay, we can look at that and then this translates the bill and I can explain that as we get that spreadsheet pulled up.
So to the folks online, we're going to do a screen share on this. Abby, we got that ready to go. Okay. And so what we'll do with the screen share, this is just an abbreviated, this is the way we typically present the omnibus water bill on the Senate floor. I can't speak for the traditions on the House. What I would say as we go through this, if there's any questions on any of these projects, what we'll do is we'll stop and then we'll go right to the bill and then walk through those projects. So does everybody understand how we're going to go through this? Or is there any questions at this point in time? I don't see any questions. So with that, Director, if you want to go ahead and start walking us through, this is the Omnibus Water Bill Planning. All yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also the bill itself is under tab 6, page 108. Online material. But really the first block here, this is, and I'll remind the committee that this is a culmination of a long process that we go through with the commission and Select Water. We bring these projects forward at the beginning through the application process, and then for planning specifically, we go through the consultant selection. So what we have in front of us now is the culmination of that goes into the omnibus bill. And so to describe the spreadsheet, we will, after this meeting, we will present everybody on this committee with what we call the blue book. And in that blue book, you will have the bill at the beginning. Tab A will be a program description. Tab B is a funding account balance. And then starting on tab C, which you will see is the first column on the spreadsheet, you will see the project recommendations. And you will have that before the session begins so that you can see what the project is that describes the project, the recommendation. So you'll have an entire electronic notebook or hard copy if you prefer. So that first column on the spreadsheet, that is the tab that will be in that blue book that you will be receiving. The next column is the bill page. So that is the actual omnibus planning bill. So on page 2 of that bill, this block of projects is identified. So the first block is for level 1 reconnaissance level studies under new development, which is water development account 1. And we've got a total of 4 projects. We've got the Clarks Fork Upper Shoshone Watershed in Park County for an amount of $396,000. And this is a watershed study. Next line down is the Dayton Water Master Plan, $167,000 in Sheridan County. This is a master plan. Riverton Regional Water Master Plan, Fremont County, $256,000. Again, it's a master plan. And then in the bill that you guys have online, this next item, the UW Water Research Program, is a TBD. And that was because we needed to have this process taken care of. So now on the spreadsheet, we have the TBD still on that. So that will change and we would need an amendment to the bill or however the committee chooses to do it for the action that was just approved. Mr. Hicks, do you have that total again?
So my total is $310,277.
Also in the bill, it summarizes all of those. So we will confirm with you when we make this amendment, get those numbers right, and that would be inserted into the bill. And just kind of a general idea of how this relates to the bill. On page 2 of the bill, each section has the initial description, describes what account it's coming from, statutes that authorize that, what the funds are appropriated for, and then ultimately on line 13 of page 2 discusses the reversion date for each of these appropriations. And then at the bottom of page 2, again, that's the same list of projects that's in the spreadsheet. Section 2 goes on, and that is the level 2 feasibility studies out of new development. So we have a level 1 feasibility study, or the reconnaissance level studies. Now we're into section 2. These are feasibility level 2 studies. Again, these are out of the new development, water development account 1. So section 1 is level 1, section 2 is level 2. And those projects include, the first one is the cloud seeding operations hydrological assessment. I will note that this project falls outside of our normal project. This one was going to be a state-led project. So the consultant has not been selected on this. Our process for doing this, we will, here very soon, we will issue a statement of information or statement of interest request from consultants. So they will just basically provide information to us to tell us that they're interested in applying for this project. Once this bill, then we will wait until this bill is approved and signed and in law before we go through the rest of the consultant selection process. Then we will issue an RFP and then consultant interview and consultant selection. The reason we do that is we want to make sure that the money is going to be there, so we're not asking consultants to put a lot of effort and time into this until we understand that this is a real project. For the first project, the cloud seeding assessment, that's the process that will happen with that.
So Mr. Director, question on that. So when we put that RFP out, just thinking, would would this be would this be available to either another agency or university? So let's say USGS decided that they wanted to take this out, or USGS in collaboration with somebody, they could actually submit a proposal and a bid for consideration to do this versus say maybe more traditional private consulting. Is that how it's anticipated, or is that a possibility?
All a friend.
Mr. Chairman, members of Select-Bar, that is correct. So we'll go through state construction. So go out on our listserv for all of our consultants. It'll be also published in the newspapers and so forth. So we really do a large casting call looking for those entities. And I will tell you, in the past, we've had entities, not only private firms, but we've had entities like NCAR. So it's been on these type of projects, and NCAR is a quasi-federal agency. So there's nothing, I mean, certainly at USGS or wherever such as that could come in.
Thank you. And we have done those, excuse me, we have done those kind of arrangements where we've selected a different agency or a university or something. So let's assume maybe an out-of-state university applied, they'd be eligible for submitted an RFP or under the request for proposals, come back, said, we'll do this for you. And here's our proposed bid.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, but obviously we have to look at risks and safety concerns.
Sure. It's still, if it was an in-state entity, it needs to get the 5% preference.
I just clarify, for planning studies, it's not a 5% preference. It has to do with get one qualified in-state firm. We do not look at any others. That's correct.
Just change. Thank you. Any questions on this portion so far of the budget? If not, go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And under this block, I'd also point out Fontenelle Reservoir Storage study. This was not brought before the board previously. This is a new development, and this request is for $1.7 million. What this is the water development, the state engineer's office, and representatives from the AG's office have been in contact and communicating with the Bureau of Reclamation. And the purpose of those meetings is to gauge the possibility of potentially purchasing more storage out of Fontenelle and trying to figure out what that water could be used for. Our hope is that the water could be used for multiple reasons, but one of them being an issue in times of curtailment on the Colorado River, that maybe we can use some of this Fontenelle water to keep our water users using their water and help use this reservoir to help offset some of that curtailment issues. So that's the communication we've been having for over the last year. So we're at a point with the Bureau of Reclamation now that through their processes and requirements, we have to enter into a contributing funds agreement. And that contributing fund agreement is a task-based agreement. And largely it allows them to get more into the negotiations and better define what that water can be. It includes a lot of the divisions within the Bureau of Reclamation, the technical services potentially, their solicitor, as well as the local offices. And so those previous communications have been going very well with the Bureau. They've been very helpful. They're really trying to work with us. But now we're at a stage now where we've got to make it formal to continue. And a large majority of this 1.7 of them back up to. So anytime that with the congressional authorization of the Fontenelle, it requires that if they are to contract new water, that it has to go through a level of NEPA. That's the same if we subcontract out of our existing accounts, we have to go through NEPA. So as part of this continuing funds agreement, a a significant portion, I believe it's about 1.5 million of this estimated number right here is for that NEPA process. The rest of it is for all the different divisions to help us through starting this negotiation. So that would be a significant portion of this ask. That really sets us up to be able to purchase water if we choose to do that. So this is a new project, and we're requesting this $1.7 million to allow the agency to enter the CFA with the Bureau to further these discussions. Is there
Mr.
any
Chairman.
questions on that particular project? I know it's new.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question would be, how many acre feet are you talking about in Continental that would be available for the state curtailment? I'm sorry, I don't have that book open, and if you could just let me know real quick, it'd be quicker than me looking it up.
Yeah, and I'm going to look it up in our project notebook. Currently, we've got, the state has contracted 125,000 acre foot up front. There is, Jason, help me with the math because I'm not finding the teacup.
Mr. Chairman, after speaking for Seed Skiddy and what U.S. Fish and Wildlife has reserved, that leaves about 215,000 acre feet that's potentially available for contract. And the Bureau needs to make sure all of that would be for contract, up for contract. And that's part of what they'll be researching as well. And that would include, that 215,000 would include the unprotected 81,000 that we keep calling the riprap project. That's included in that 215,000 number.
In short, there's a lot of work going on with Fontenelle.
Mr. Chairman, along those lines, I'm assuming that the environmental impact statement would actually cover the riprapping project also, potential use of that 81,000 acre feet. Or not.
Any of the EA or EIS or any NEPA that we would do, that will start after we tell the Bureau of Reclamation what we want to consider. So anything that we would contemplate purchasing would be covered under this.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add real quick, that NEPA would also include, I guess, the operational changes going into an extreme drought event. So that's where we talk about once we're in curtailment, Fontenelle Reservoir can no longer store because it's post-compact water right. Therefore, seeing that curtailment coming, Reclamation would change their management, not release water for hydropower generation, and in return, keep that in the reservoir for use during the curtailment. So that would also be considered during the NEPA process, as well as the contracts and the riprap project and so on and so forth.
Go under that scenario, Jason, because that's the realistic scenario that we need to look at. And I think that's the primary interest of the states to get that water under contract. So that would be analyzed under a scenario where the state would retain under contract with the BOR the majority of that pool. How does that change that decision-making matrix? So if that's the case and the state says, well, we want to carry over, X, and then evacuate after a certain date, and then deliver that to Flaming Gorge. Will all of those scenarios be run through as a potential alternative? Because if we're going to do this and we're looking at the actual operating criteria under extreme drought, I just want to make sure that we're actually looking at those potential scenarios in the EIS. Is that what when you talk about that, is that what we're really looking at here?
We're looking at every option under the sun is the way I perceive it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I'll also add that as we go through this, the congressional authorization also has certain uses for this. And so we're trying to determine what those uses are and how that would impact the operation. And what we're trying to do, obviously, we would like to hold it all until we say let it go. But they also have some contractual and authorization issues that we need to work out too. So that will all play into, we buy the whole thing, we entertain purchasing whole thing. Does it matter if we purchase the whole thing? It's still gonna happen. If that's the case. Reserve some of their pool that we don't purchase. A lot of things going into that, but they do have some additional obligations outside of what we would like to do, that would still be intact. Right.
Mr. Chairman, I just think it's really important that we look at those. I'd like to really be able to petition the state under scenario that, because even all of Fondell water is out of priority under a call, we would retain the ownership author, or not necessarily ownership, but the contract obligation for that entire pool. So then we can then turn around and lease it back to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for seed skidoo to maintain their operation, because they'll be out of priority too.
They will be, Mr. Chairman, and I think we'll have to answer the question whether we could use our portion. I believe a portion of that may be already dedicated to CTE. I don't know that we could purchase it and then lease it back. As additional water that they needed, but I think that there's priorities. They're obligated.
Yeah, and I agree with that characterization. But when you're out of priority, you're out of priority. And so if there's been conserved water from the previous year prior to any regulatory call, I would anticipate that if we do a demand management program under a severe drought, they're going to be out there looking to acquire water also. And I can see a scenario where my concern is that we would end up with a NEPA document that would somehow supersede Wyoming water law. You know, and under the Curie Act, they're obligated to follow our water law. So I just see some scenarios under a worst case scenario that there could be say, well, we're going to reserve this X amount of water that's really not carryover water for our federal purposes. And it was just completely inconsistent with our own prior appropriation doctrine. So I think we need to run all these scenarios through our own mind and figure out, and then prompt some interesting questions with the Bureau, I'm sure. So,
Yeah, there's a lot more.
so thank you. Committee, any other questions on this item? All right, Director, if you would.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew had his hand up.
Senator Drew, I can't see you when we've got the screen share. Go ahead.
It's okay, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask, and it's a great discussion, and I appreciate it. And what I wanted to make sure I had tracking was the 1.7 million that we're talking about is to do the things that we were just talking about. Is that true? Does that include money for environmental studies and all that, or is that in a subsequent request? Or that's, I'm just trying to make sure I get what that 1.7 gets us exactly. Or is it just running scenarios and initial discussions, or whatever? Just make sure I understand.
Mr. Chairman, the 1.7 is based on an estimate provided by the Bureau, and it does include their estimate for what they see NEPA as now. That can change depending on many factors, but for now it is at least some level, and I believe they called it a EIS, environmental impact study. It does include that. If it becomes more than that, then we would likely need an additional request, but for now there is some level of NEPA included. And I would say probably a significant amount.
So Senator, I think to answer your question, I think the director's correct on that part of it. I think the other part of your question is as well, as this get us what we want? So this just gets us the environmental document and hopefully a favorable record, a decision that would then allow the state of Wyoming to exercise a right to contract with the Bureau of Reclamation to acquire that extra water and maybe allow the state of Wyoming to go ahead and do the riprap, which would be a whole different expenditure. So if this goes through, we get a favorable record of decision, and it's the decision of the state of Wyoming to exercise additional contracts with the Bureau. That's going to be another line item in a budget. It's going to cost additional money. And then if we wanted to go further than that and actually look at that bottom 81,000 acre feet, would be another additional cost to the state of Wyoming and the water users to upfront and do the riprap construction for the contracting of that other 81,000 acre feet. So it could be over the next decade, a numerous series of additional financial arrangements with the Bureau of Reclamation to obtain portions or all of that additional pool that would be covered under this environmental document. Is that what you were asking, Senator?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and thanks. I know, I know it's just a first step. It's a big first step, but it's a big, so I just wanted to make sure I knew what that first step encompassed, knowing full well that there are many steps and many dollars yet to come. So just wanted to get a handle on that. Thank you. Thanks for the help. I appreciate it.
So Director, do we have an estimated time frame from the Bureau, since how we'll actually be contracting with them to do the environment? They may hire some third-party help, but what's the discussion as far as time frame to get this underway and then look forward to a record of the decision? They indicated what they think is reasonable time frame.
So I'll start with when this CFA could be executed. We've, I guess, authorized them to, maybe not authorized the right word, but we've asked them to start developing this contract, this agreement. And so they're going through the process right now, and they thought that the agreement would be in draft form, ready for our review around March, which coincides with this bill would become law. So we're in line there. And so then there would be some discussions, and before NEPA would start, the state has to come to some decisions as to what our desire is. And so we will have to define that and give that to them that they can put into an EIS. And Jason, I don't know, did in those previous conversations, once we tell them what we would like to entertain, did they have an estimate on how long NEPA would take?
Mr. Chairman, we hadn't gotten to that part of the discussion because of the unknown of what the actual Wyoming ask is going to look like, which is related to a lot of their research and some technical meetings we're going to have to fully understand what we can contract for.
And I would add on that depending on that ask, and then depending on some of the review that they're going through, will define the level of NEPA. So if it's and I will give the Bureau so far kudos that they are really trying to make this as efficient as possible for us. So if we get to the point where it's just an environmental assessment, that's a much shorter timeline than a full-blown EIS. So we are working towards what the definition of it is and how much.
Have you explored the opportunities for them to classify this as a CE?
Yeah,
categorically excluded from the National Environmental Policy Act.
We've asked the question. We think that's kind of a long shot, but we've asked the question, and it is still on the table. But
all right, committee. Oh, so based on that discussion, is you have to provide an ask from the state of Wyoming. What do you think the role of the Select Water Committee be the Select Water Committee in developing that ask is? And the commission. Let me ask that question.
ask for.
So when we get to the Bureau of Reclamation and we get in this process, we execute the contract, and it was discussed that there'll be a series of questions that will come back and say, well, we want all of it or part of it. So what role do you see the commission and the Select Water Committee having in determining what that might look like?
Mr. Chairman, I view this as a state decision. So what we will do through this process is we'll get a list of options. We'll be able to bring to the commission and Select Water legislature which options are available and what it means. And then I think we're going to have some decisions made to go back to say, this is what the state would like to do. And I don't know that it's necessarily in the office's purview to go say, this is what we're looking for without some further discussions with a lot of people, including the governor's office, like Water Commission. But we would like to be able to look at all the options, bring those forward and present them.
I appreciate that answer. Commissioner, committee, any questions on this? Not proceed, please.
Mr. Chairman, and then so going back to the spreadsheet under this second block for new development, there are two other LaGrange groundwater improvements for $725,000. That's a feasibility study, as well as the Pavilion groundwater supply, Fremont County feasibility study for $687,000. I will note in those that is development of new water in the form of wells. So that's the reason for that price tag. And so that would be section 2 of the bill. Section 3 of the bill would be a level 1. The level 1 projects out of account 2, the rehabilitation account. There are 2 projects in that. Again, we mentioned that the cloud seeding assessment is a statewide or a state-led study. The critical aging irrigation infrastructure assessment is also a state-led study. And so this will go through the same consultant selection process that we described for the previous project. So we do not have a consultant selected for that. That will be kind of coincide with legislature and then following legislature. So those 2 projects for that block under section 3 of the bill total $588,000. Mr. Chairman, then to section 4 of the bill, which would be the next block. These are slightly different because, or excuse me. So section 4 would be for if we had any level 2 studies from the rehab account. We do not have any of those. Or excuse me, we do. We have Dell and Ditch. I apologize. 110,000. Section 5. Section 5 funds the Office of Water Program. This is their biennial budget. This has been occurring for many years. This is ongoing. This would fund their July 1st, 2022 to July 30th, 2024 budget. So $175,000 for 2 years. Section 6 of the bill, which would be the next phase or the next block on the spreadsheet. These are amendments to previous appropriations. And we've got 2 amendments in here. One is for a 5-year time extension for the West Fork Reservoir. And then the second is a time extension and an addition of $150,000 to the ongoing Little Wind River Storage Phase 2 project. And I'll point out in section 6, this is slightly different because this is going back and amending previous appropriations. So the format of this is essentially going back and making those amendments to that prior legislation. Mr. Chairman, on page 7 of the bill, that describes the extension of the reversion. That's the type of extension. I can stand for any questions.
Any questions? There's no questions. I would entertain a motion on the planning bill. Bill's been moved and seconded. Members, any amendments? Senator Grew.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if you're entertaining them on page 2. On page 2, line 26, add 310,277. And then I think on line 27, that would equal 1,129,277 in that line, if I did the math right, and I would check that.
I checked it, but we are senators, so we probably need to get third-party verification on those numbers.
Yeah.
So I have a motion. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hands. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Any other amendments on the planning bill? Abigail, will you call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, roll call vote on 22 LSO 344 version 5 omnibus planning bill as amended. Senator Boner,
Excuse. He left a proxy here. Senator Boner left a proxy and he was, yes.
Senator Driscoll,
Excuse.
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Nyman,
Aye.
Representative Paxton,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks,
Aye.
Chairman Simpson.
Aye.
Chairman Simpson, you want to start this in the House or the Senate?
Why don't you let us take the planning bill and you can take the construction? Would that be okay?
It's whatever your wish is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let's go that way.
So the Senate will take the construction, and so this would be a House bill, Abigail. All right, next item on the agenda is Omnibus Water Bill Construction. Item number 8. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the actual bill itself is page 116 notebook. We also have a blue sheet spreadsheet if we can share that. Mr. Chairman, again, this is very somewhat similar to the planning bill. Construction bill is set up slightly differently in that it has a little more detail on each of these projects. So I will go provide an example for, say, the cloud seeding. And that is under the level 3 projects for new development. So that's water development account 1. And on page 3 of the bill starts that process or starts that project. So each of these projects, they'll have a project title, who the sponsor is, a project purpose, and then a project description. So that's common with all of them. What is also common is the total project budget. And then we get into the appropriation. So the appropriation may not be the entire project. So for this one, example, 823,490 is the appropriation of the 873,490. The reason for that is some of the special conditions associated with this project that we acquire additional funding commitments from Wyoming water users for this project. That's listed as a special condition. It also, the special conditions for this project also allow us to, or authorize us to enter into a contract with Colorado. If you remember correctly, the aerial cloud seeding program can provide flights into Colorado, but that is paid completely by Colorado. So any flight in there is paid by them. They use it, they run it through our contract. We have a contract with the company. That's the first cloud seeding. The next project is the second cloud seeding. That is the Wind River Sierra Madre. Back to the spreadsheet. The description is snow augmentation. The next project then is the Crystal Bypass Pipeline 2022 project. The amount of $2,546,000. And this is a 67% grant. There's no loan component to this. This is for generally for pipelines, transmission pipelines. Next project on page 8 is the Evanston Transmission Pipeline 2022 in Uinta County, Water Development Account 1 for $1,219,400 at a 67% grant. Next project, Mr. Chairman, is the Gillette Regional Extension Phase 6, 2022, Campbell County.
Representative Gephardt, I just have a quick question on that. Where is that budget at? Are there, I understand there's some situations there, legalities, problems with the pipeline. I'm sure like that. I just wondered who might have some what's happening? Is that the same project?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, oh, you're talking the Gillette Regional?
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is a different project. So the Gillette Regional project was an overall project to regionalize and drill some wells up there. So we are working through some of the final phases of that project, and there was an issue with a pipe rupture as part of the construction. And that did slow things down. And so there was some discussions between the owner and their engineer and the contractor. I believe that they have gotten those resolved and are back to constructing them.
So I'm just curious, in my discussion with the constituent, they were wondering about the fact that there was legal situations between them. City and said, she said. Just curious as to where that project was at.
I believe that it is close to it.
They have declared that it was resolved. There's pushback on that or not. I have not heard of any yet. Project is moving.
Currently, there's 5 wells drilled currently they're utilizing, or they're pumping 2 of those 3 more need to be developed. Is that
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, all of the wells were drilled. 2 of the wells are able to be used. The other 2 were part of this last phase. So they're finishing up the utilization of the wells as well as installing. Maybe I'll just let Bill be.
And the director was correct on that, the 2 wells are in production and being used at this point. The other 3 wells were in the final stages of that when this issue occurred. So there is some repair work that needs to be done. Finish up the development of those wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last project under new development is the Northwest Rural Water System Improvements 2022 appropriation request of $700,150 at a 67% grant. This is pipeline and storage tanks. Under the level 3 projects out of account 2, the rehabilitation account. First project is the Bighorn Canal Adobe Check Structure 2022. Again, this is Bighorn County, and this is out of account 2, and this is a request of $154,100 at a 67% grant. I will mention that when it only says a 67% grant, the sponsor is required to come up with the remaining 33%. That has been the case with everything we discussed today. Chairman, on the Bighorn Canal. Canal. Irrigation district.
Chairman, I'm not 100% sure. I believe they were an irrigation district, but I can verify that.
The recommendation, the sponsor is listed as Bighorn Canal Irrigation District. Mr. Chairman. Next project, Cottonwood Irrigation District Pipeline Replacement in Lincoln County. Appropriation request of $1.6 million. This is broken out into a 67% grant, 33% loan. The appropriation grants allows for the grant portion as well as the loan, and then the terms of the loan are in the bill, and typically 4%, anywhere from 20 to 50 years. And the description for is a pipeline, but you'll also see note 2. I'll describe that real quick. So some of these projects are dependent on the transfer that we will talk about in section 3 of the bill. This is a transfer request from Water Development Account 1 to Water Development Account 2. I believe we've talked about that in the November meeting with you, that we would be making that request. We had to make some of these projects contingent or would be able to fund this. Next project is the Deaver Irrigation Rehabilitation 2022. Request of $816,810. This is a 30% grant. They were able to find additional outside funding sources for the remaining 70%, including their own resources. I was going across, I apologize. Dry Creek Irrigation District pipeline replacement. Funding requests or appropriation request of $1.85 million. This is a 67% grant, 33% loan. Again, this is contingent on the transfer. Next project is the Goshen Irrigation District 29.4 pipeline project phase 2 2022 in Goshen. The funding or appropriation request at $290,000. This is a materials only grant. And I'll remind the committee that materials only, we pay invoice price for materials purchased, and then the sponsor is required for the engineering, the installation, and the oversight of the installation. Again, this is contingent on the transfer. The next project is the Goshen Irrigation District Tunnel Rehab 2022 in Goshen. Appropriation request amount of $2.35 million. And I'll describe what we're doing with this. So if you remember in November, we had a discussion about 49% of the overall Bureau facility is in Wyoming, 51% is in Nebraska. So our initial request was to help Goshen with their 49% and a 67% grant, 33% loan funding for the design component, design portion of the project. We're only talking the design portion up to pre-construction. Eventually bidding. This is not funding the construction itself. So at the November meeting, discussion with the commission and this committee, we talked about providing a loan for the remaining 51% to Goshen that they would be on the hook for. They could, however, they secure their securities from Nebraska entities. That will be some sort of agreement or some sort of security the commission that they have to approve before we will put that money in. Making sense on that. There has to be a level of adequacy of security for us to do it. All of that is worked into the bill, and in the bill itself on page, starting on page 23, but actually page 24, I believe we're talking about it. You will see that there are two loan components to this appropriation. Reason is that 33% of the additional 49% full loan amount for the remaining 51%.
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt? Could you please ask Director Gephardt to bring that microphone really close to his mouth? He's breaking up occasionally, or we're not able to get his full sentences.
My apologies. Okay, the next project then is the Highland Hanover Irrigation District System Improvements 2022 in Washakie County. Appropriation request of $4.611 million. The 67% grant, 33% loan. Take a pause for a second. Next project, Mr. Chairman, is the Level Moncour Lateral Phase 2 Rehabilitation in Park and Bighorn counties. Appropriation request of $991,000. And again, this is a materials only, and this is a contingent project on the transfer as well. Last project under level 3 rehabilitation is the Owl Creek Irrigation District System Improvements in Hot Springs County. Appropriation request of $5,040,000, and that's a 67% grant, 5% loan, and then 28% is coming from the sponsor. So those are the rehab accounts. The next block on this spreadsheet and in the bill, these are amendments. The first amendment for the Green River, Rock Springs, Sweetwater County raw water reservoir is a 1-year time extension. Laramie North Side Tank in Albany County is a 2-year time extension. The next project is the Small Water Project Program New Development. This occurs every year. And so the appropriation request is for $1 million for that program. Again, that project or that program will fund up to $35,000 at a 50-50 match with the sponsor. And that to date, I believe we have 76 applications. And 15 are in account 2 and the remainder are out of this new development account. So continuing on, the next item on the list is the small water out of the rehab account. And we typically have done $500,000 in that. And again, that's a 50-50 match for the small water program. The next project is the Broken Wheel Ranch Water Supply 2017, 1-year time extension. Gillette Regional Extensions 2017, requesting a 2-year time extension. Middle Piney Reservoir, this is a 2-year time extension. The next project is the Laramie Valley Diversion Structure 2020. This is an increase in the previous appropriation of $700,000, and that's at a 67% grant, 33% loan. And Mr. Chairman, the next item on the list is the Sponsor Contingency Fund Account 3. Originally, the request from the commission was for $10 million. Yesterday, at the commission meeting, we had some discussion on that, and in light of what's going on with Levitt, as well as all our other projects, the commission approved, rather than a $10 million increase in that account, to increase that to a $20 million increase in the contingency account. So I do believe that the bill that is in the notebook only shows an increase of $10 million. So the commission's action would require an amendment to that to increase that from $10 million increase to a $20 million increase. And that would be on page 41 of the bill. So on lines 19 and 20 of page 41, the original appropriation was for 10 million. Because this is an amendment that strikes the 10 million and inserts 20 million. That's only a $10 million increase. So if the committee goes along with the commission's recommendation, that would need to be amended to 30 million rather than the 20. And the same on the following page, at the top of the following page, lines 1 and 2, that would also need to be increased to 30 million. Mr. Chairman, continuing on, the last section of the bill is section 3 of the bill. This is the transfer from account 1 to account 2 in the amount of $7 million. And then section 4 defines the effective date of the bill. I stand for any questions on the Omnibus Water Construction Bill.
Any questions for the director? No questions? What's your pleasure, committee? Bill's
Bill.
been seconded by Senator Guru. Any discussion? No discussion? We have an amendment.
I'll give it a shot.
Senator Steinmetz.
Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 41, line 20, I would like to increase that to 30 million. On page 42, line 1, I would like to increase that to 30 million, or line 2, excuse me, to 30 million.
Discussion?
second.
Second on the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? No discussion. All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Back on the bill. There's no more amendments. Abigail, would you call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, roll call vote on 22 LSO 345 version 2 Omnibus Construction Bill as amended. Senator Boner,
He left Proxy. Proxy is yes.
Senator Driscoll,
Excuse.
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Nyman. Representative Paxton.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks.
Aye.
Chairman Simpson.
Aye.
And five. Abigail, any other actions we need to take there? I will, just for formality purposes, do we have anybody online that would like to comment on these? Anybody in the audience would like to comment on these? All right, thank you. Public comments closed. Next item for our consideration is item 9 on the agenda, supplemental water development funding. Abigail, I'll start with you.
Mr. Chairman, am I good from here?
That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, this is the bill that was requested by the committee at its last meeting regarding adding additional projects, the projects that were listed out at the end of the meeting. They've been put into a bill draft form at this point in time. They were not, there was a question whether they would go as amendments or be a separate bill draft, and Chairman decided to go ahead with a separate bill draft. So on page 1, you're going to see a transfer from the general fund to water development account 2. And then there's a staff comment that the current omnibus construction bill has a separate transfer of $7 million from WDA, water development account 1, to water development account 2. So I put that in there for the committee to decide if you want both of those or if there's one that you want to get rid of. In section 2, you're going to see appropriations. The first one under AI is $2 million to water development account 1. And these are all appropriated from the general fund. And this is for the groundwater exploration program. Subsection 2, $25 million to water development account 1 for acquiring storage capacity in Fontenelle Reservoir. It authorizes the Water Development Office to negotiate a purchase agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation. But it says, and this is a question for the committee, I put in there, no funds shall be expended from this appropriation until the negotiated purchase agreement is approved by the commission, the governor, and the legislature. So that was put in as a check for the committee. If you wanted to see that before it went through. If you don't and you want to push it through, you can amend that out. There's also a staff comment that the Select Water Committee in a previous omnibus construction bill authorized purchase of storage water in the Lake DeSmet and Healy reservoirs. And that was actually written up as a project in the construction bill, and you can find that in Title 99. So going forward, if the committee wanted to see that again, that might be an opportunity is to go ahead and come back and they have a purchase agreement to put it into Title 99.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, Abigail, one of the things that we did when we did Lake to Submit was we broadcast what we were willing to pay. And so for some of these things, is that something that the committee might want to consider as we, just a food for thought as we go forward, or how we might be able to do that as well?
Senator, that was a private transaction between the state and a private. This would be a little bit different because Fontenelle, you're dealing with it's going to be a contract for acquisition of the water versus an outright purchase price on a piece of real estate. So I don't think we're going to have the ability to negotiate a contract price on that water that will be established by the mayor. And so I don't know that we would need to basically say that we're not going to show you how much money on the table here on this particular. Is that correct? Correct. Will it be a negotiated price with BOR, or they just set the price and then we say we'll accept it?
We will try to negotiate as much as we can, but it's more likely they'll tell us the price.
And I think under the current agreement that the state has, we have the terminology, it's the first right of refusal, require some of that additional storage here. So it's not like a third-party entity is going to come in between us and we say we're going to switch acquisition of water. Is that an accurate characterization?
Mr. Chairman, it is, and that first right of refusal is, the way we understand it today, is only for a portion of the remaining 219,000 acre feet. So there is a portion of that we do have the first right of refusal on. The remaining portion is not. That's some of the things that we're working on.
Okay.
We don't have the first right of refusal portion.
Does that resolve some of your concerns?
Mr. Chairman, it does, but having a little past experience with
BOR?
the BOR, I'm not quite as amenable to that as maybe others in the BORs.
All right, committee, Abigail, go ahead, if you will, please walk us through where we at now.
Mr. Chairman, we're on paragraph 3 on page 3. This is a $21 million appropriation to account 2 for the Goshen Irrigation District Tunnels 1 and 2 Rehabilitation Water Development Project. Again, this is no funds shall be expended from this appropriation until the legislature authorizes that project as a water development program construction project, which would be putting it into the construction bill as a Title 99, but it does appropriate the money for it. In paragraph 4, $2 million to water development account 2. This is to fund the sponsor's contingency fund. Paragraph 5, $30 million to water development account 2 for the purpose of the LaPrelle Dam Rehabilitation Water Development Project. Again, this is a no fund shall be expended from this appropriation until the legislature authorizes that program in Title 99. Paragraph 6, $35 million to water development account 2 for Alkali Creek Reservoir Project. And this one has been authorized in Title 99. It's an existing project. And so I made a staff note there that has an existing appropriation of $59. Paragraph 7, $30 million to water development account 2. This is for the Levitt Reservoir Expansion Project, and it is also currently authorized with an existing appropriation of $46 million. And then subsection B, this is standard language saying that any of the funds shall not be transferred and expended for any other purpose, notwithstanding sections of law. And then unobligated general funds appropriated shall revert to the water development account to which they were appropriated. And then I needed the committee to kind of provide some feedback of how long do you want this money sitting out there appropriated?
You have a recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, based on some of the different contingencies, some of these longer projects, it's 10 years too much.
So, any, just note that, any discussion on that? So we'll be looking at 2032 of these. Any discussion on that? Senator,
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No discussion. I'm okay on 32, but I think some of us, I'll speak for everybody, but we're having a little trouble hearing y'all. And you know, this is awful important bill for everybody, and we want to make sure we hear everything that's said. So if you could help us out, I'd really appreciate it. I know we all would. Thanks.
so I think that's all of us. Me, Abigail, and the director get a little closer to the microphone than anybody else that's speaking. So the recommendation was for those folks on Zoom, when we're on page 5, line 18, based on staff has left that open. Recommendation from the director was to make those shall revert back to the water development counts on 2032 would be the date that we'd stick in there. Part of the rationale is it's not uncommon sometimes for some of these dam projects to take 10 years from the time the money is appropriated till they're completely finished off. So I think that's the rationale. Any discussion on that? We'll come back and make amendments later, but right now we'll call that as a placeholder. All right, Abigail, if you continue.
Mr. Chairman, starting right at the bottom of page 5, we have section 3, and these are going to be amendments. And so up in section 2, you saw appropriations from the general fund to the water development account. Well, now we're going in and appropriating money, that money that was appropriated to water development out of water development for the following programs. The first one on the top of page 6, is for the groundwater studies program, and that would be increasing that by the amount that was previously identified. And then towards the bottom of page 6 into page 7 is where we're appropriating that money from water development account into the sponsor's contingency fund for rehabilitation projects.
So this is not a general fund appropriation. This is authorization to expend out of account 1. Is that correct? Did I hear that correct, Abigail?
Mr. Chairman, the way this was done is page 2.
Page 2.
Yeah, page 2, lines 17 through 20. That is where you're appropriating $2 million from the general fund to water development account 1.
Okay.
Now flip back to page 6 there. And where we're editing the dollar amount in the 412119, that is allowing the commission to expend that money then from water development account. Wherever it's listed in there. It's like 1. So it's allowing them to then spend that $2 million.
Okay, I'm tracking. Is everybody tracking? We've appropriated that money in the first section, and this is coming back and then authorizing the expenditures of those funds by the commission through those accounts. All right, thank you. Want to continue?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's the end of the bill with just an immediate effective date.
Committee, any questions? Questions, committee? Getting back to your staff comment, Abigail, I think what we would want to do is put a controlling language in here. In other words, if this bill passes, and we do that for each one of those sections where you have the staff comment that there's already an existing appropriation, that if this bill should pass or any section of this bill should pass, those general funds would go in to replace those existing appropriations. And so what that effectively does is if we include that language and the bill passes and there's an appropriation for Lever Reservoir, we take those general funds, replace those with those current appropriated account 3 funds, those funds would then go back into account 3. Everybody understand that? The way we would structure that, Abigail, and I'll ask for an amendment to that and allow a little bit of latitude for the staff to wordsmith that. That would be a potential conceptual to address all these staff comments here. So it's only if the bill passes or a section of the bill passes, then these general funds would basically offset those. And then we need that controlling language in there. So this would control over the omnibus water bill or existing appropriations currently. Is that, so how do we need to craft that?
Mr. Chairman, I think I would want quite a bit of leeway so I can talk to Don Richards as to how to best effectuate that, but perhaps there's a way to spend certain monies before other monies. Since these are appropriated in Title 99, we might be able to specifically reference that.
And we'd want to make sure that with the language in there, that if these are, if this bill controls, those monies either come out of an existing appropriation, those appropriations will revert back to the account which they originally come out of.
Mr. Chairman, if that truly is the intent, it might be a good idea just to bring in those, I identified the 99.32205E for Levitt. Simply bring that language in and amend the dollar amounts and the funding source in Title 99 to amend that section versus trying to do controlling provisions. Because then if this passes, you will be changing Title 99, the existing law.
So I'll defer to the LSO staff attorneys on, how the structure of that could flow. But we certainly, that's the intent that we want to accomplish. Director, you got a comment?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question with that concept. Using Levitt as an example, if we've got a project that exceeds the original appropriation, this bill passes and brings additional money in, we have to how would we be able to use a portion of the existing appropriation that we're trying to offset to allow the project to continue if it's above the appropriation amount? Making any sense?
Yeah, it is. And so under that scenario, trying to run that out. So that may be a real life scenario. So have we gone into the omnibus water bill and already added those additional funds into the original appropriation?
Mr. Chairman, what we have in the omnibus bill is $46 million appropriated. We spent 5, so we've got 41 remaining. So what the conversation I was hearing, that if this bill passes, it would take, say, the 20 million or whatever that number was, and put that into that project, take 20 million out of the appropriation, set that back in water development. The question is, can we do it so that we only take 10 million out of the existing appropriation, replacing that?
I say it's a wonderful concept, but I don't think we want to go because it starts to get extremely complicated. And I think what we'd have to do is come back and either use the contingency fund to offset that, or come back and reappropriate like you do with an amendment to the contract. So I think if we just granted that in there, I don't think that would stand the litmus test of scrutiny in the Senate or the House. And in effect, what we're doing is without, we're providing a legislative authorization to just offset whatever those costs are. The legislature would want to know what those costs are. And so I would be reluctant to do that. I understand the concept, but I think this keeps it cleaner, and it also keeps it within the normal process. There's contingencies that can come back through the commission, legislative select board, any contract amendments to do that. So I think that's a much cleaner existing process that we have versus saying, now if we're offset 20 million, let's say 40, we're going to offset 20. There's a cost increase, but that just only thing that reverts is 10. It creates a transparency issue, I think, certainly for the legislature. Any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was some discussion about bringing in the enabling legislation for like Alkali Creek and Levitt Creek or Levitt Reservoir. And my question is there any potential to jeopardize the original funding by doing that? If they don't like this bill, can they go in and change 59 million or 46 million to zero by doing that?
Only if the bill passed. And so, anything, time you bring anything in and you open up a section, it can be amended on the floor. But I don't think there's a lot of risk of that because we're looking at a general fund appropriation, and I'm sure somebody might try to pull. There's always the opportunity that there could be a little shenanigans, but the risk of it actually happen, I think, are so extremely low. Somebody's going to amend out an ongoing project that there's already funds obligated for. It's so remote that I don't think it's, in my mind, I don't think it's a likely probability that would happen for a project that's currently in construction. And even one that was authorized, I don't see that scenario happen. Certainly the potential's there, but actually somebody making that motion and actually getting that all the way through the legislative process, I don't think that's going to happen. That would be my estimation. Anybody on the committee have any other thoughts? Chairman Simpson? You see something like that potentially actually occurring?
I think it is a risk, but I think the probability is extremely low.
I think the potential offsets justify it. It's just a slight bit of risk to try to do this. We're talking significant amount of money to restore those accounts back up to fully fund development. So in my mind, what risk is out there is certainly offset by financial rewards, sustainability of the program. So anybody else like to opine on this subject? All right, so where are we at, Abigail? We have a conceptual, we haven't moved the bill, have we? Go ahead, ask, is there a motion to move? Director, you have another question?
Mr. Chairman, I do, and I don't know the proper protocol, but this would be more of a public comment with the state engineer hat on. If that's acceptable, I just ask, is there a potential or appetite to consider potential funding for the state engineer's office, some of their work with Green River of Wyoming, Colorado? Some of the needs that I think we need include some technical services, including modeling, systems with curtailment, a lot of technical needs, and to help us start answering some questions, what a curtailment in that basin. I didn't know if it would be appropriate to ask this body to consider funding for the state.
So, and I've had this discussion with the director, and so I think there's certainly a need out there to look at that, to do that. I think this is the wrong vehicle. And my concerns is because those funds would go into the state engineer's budget to hire that expertise. This is a water project funding bill, and so I think it's something that the Select Water Committee may look at, but that would be, in my mind, the appropriate vehicle to do that would be a budget amendment to the state engineer's office to add those funds in the 900 series to be able to contract for the services. And the budget bill's already out there. So what that would come down to is, that will go to the floor as part of the state engineer's office budget. So what the appropriate way to do that would be some members of the Select Water Committee or the Joint Ag Committee to do a mirror amendment to the budget to put that funds into the state engineer's office into their 900 series. That has a much higher probability of getting funded that way than I think of putting it into this bill. So if it is a high need, this is probably not the vehicle to drive that discussion. Which hat do you got on now?
I put my watermelon hat back on.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, before we that subject. We had a position. State engineer's office to work on that.
So yes, we did put a position in the state engineer's office to coordinate and oversee the activities within the Colorado River Basin. Within Wyoming. I'm going to turn this over to the director. You know, what I would really like to do is just hold this conversation off. You know, we've got a bill and we've got a conceptual motion. Let's deal with that before we dive off into the state engineer's office. So if we can deal with the topic at hand. So Abigail, we have a conceptual motion. Where are we at?
Mr. Chairman, I still need a motion on the bill.
Okay. So do I have a motion to move the bill?
So moved.
Second? Second by Senator Drew, moved by Representative Eklund. Any discussion? Any amendments?
Mr. Chairman, one amendment I would propose to the committee that on page 5, line 18, that we would insert the date. 32.
Yes, second. Discussion? No discussion. All those in favor say aye. Same sign, no. Motion passes. Let's do that again. I want to get a count. So all those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Back on the bill. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, just a question. Clarification when we get to page 6 and 7, voting on what's in red print here, the changes have already been made. Those amendments are already.
That's correct. All right. Any more amendments? So, Abigail, I have the proposed conceptual amendment. So can you read that back to the committee as to how that would look?
Mr. Chairman, I have about a half page of notes. But I have where the goal of the committee is to offset the existing WDA account fundings with general fund dollars and for the Levitt and Alkali Creek projects.
That's correct. And
With latitude to figure out how
if
best to
this bill
accomplish.
or any portion of it, those funds that would then revert back to the appropriate account. And those particularly would be account 3. We need that language in there to make sure that it would go back into those accounts.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed when I pulled up, I think it was Levitt, the existing reversion date for those WDA funds is 2025, and you're adding a 2032 reversion date here. Does that need to be adjusted for any of those? Will the reversion date in those reservoir projects also need to be extended?
Again, if we put that controlling section in there, that would move that reversion date back to 2032. I think that's probably a good idea. And the reason is just the nature. Even after construction, there's always something that comes up a year later that needs a little modification. So leaving that appropriation in there for those, it could be additional riprap, something's found, you know, a year or two down the road. I think we would want to leave those appropriations until we get direction from the office and the commission to go ahead. And if they're available to revert earlier, we can do it that way. Director, what's your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I believe that once the project's done, we can make the request, revert that money, but I think what I'm understanding Abby to say is that previous appropriation of 41 million has a 2025 reversion date, and this pot would have 2032. So would that automatically extend previous appropriation, or would it just split that appropriation? Some has to be spent by 2025 and some by 2032.
Mr. Chairman, the way I'm envisioning this right now to get this proposed motion accomplished would be to go into 99.32205, similar to the amended sections you see in this, and paragraph 7 of subsection E is I'm looking at Levitt here, is the Levitt Reservoir project. And so it has the appropriation. I would pull that appropriation into this bill, strike the $46 million from Water Development Account 3, say I'd adjust that number. I'd do $30 million from general fund, reduce the 46 million by, actually it might, you probably don't want to reduce the existing funds, or I'll reduce the 46 million by 30 million, leaving about 16 million from WDA 3. But those reversion dates are currently is 2025. So it's just some direction from the committee.
So what we would do on those again, we'd go ahead and modify that back to the 2032. With any infusion of general fund dollars, by modifying that section 99, we'd also modify the reversion date too as part of that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask for one clarification. So on Levitt Reservoir, for example, if this were passed, then we would have the original appropriation would change from 46 million to 16 million from account 3 and 30 million from the general fund. So that difference, I guess, on the account 3 funding would then revert to account 3. So we'd still have 46 million. It would just be a mixture of funding sources, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
It's clear as dirty water. All right, we're still on the bill. So we have I need a motion for the draft conceptual amendment that we just discussed with Abigail.
Mr. Chairman, I think you actually did make that motion, but you need a second.
I need a second.
Hang
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We're back on the bill. Any other amendments? No amendments. Call for the question. Abby, would you call roll?
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call vote 22 LSO 349 version 5 supplemental water development funding bill as amended. Senator Boner,
Senator Bonner, I'm going to leave his, he left a proxy of yes.
Senator Driscoll,
Hughes?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Nyman,
Aye.
Representative Paxton,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks,
Aye.
Chairman Simpson.
Aye.
So Chairman Simpson, what's your predisposition? Senate file?
Please, it's your baby. Send it over to the Senate, see if you can get it through.
We'll take a run at it. All right, Senate file, Abby. Next thing I got on the agenda is adjourn, but what I would do is open it up to the committee or anybody in the audience that has anything they would like to add or address at this time.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Chairman Simpson.
Thank you. Folks, yesterday, the Water Development Commission agreed to hold our summer meeting in Star Valley. So we'll look forward to doing that. You need to tweak your calendars 1 week. So it'll be the week of August 17th, plus or minus a day there. There's a Fairfield Inn, but there's also a new resort that has individual log cabins. It costs a little more, but we'll try to get a cost break on that. That's really fun if you're bringing your spouse. We encourage you to bring your spouses. We're going to drive up canyons. We'll have a hike up to the intermittent spring. We're going to show you a lot of irrigation projects that were funded through our Water Development Commission over the last decade. And we're going to really give you a good time. So we encourage all of you to come and make a vacation out of it. Appreciate your willingness to come. clear to Idaho to experience the meeting, but it'll be worth it if you're willing to come. And thanks everyone for your attendance today. Appreciate all you do.
So Chairman Simpson, I'm wondering, are you leading the guided fly fishing expedition in the Salt River later in the evening after the tour?
I am not a good fly fisherman, but I'll arrange to have someone that is do that for you.
All right, committee, any more questions? Thank you, Chairman Simpson, for that. Look forward to coming over. It's a beautiful piece of the country over there. Anyway, committee, any other things for the good of the committee? Abby, are we clear to go? Everything's good? All right, we are adjourned.